Well, I guess we can start. Thank you again for showing up. We're going to talk about some really different kinds of things now over the next 4 or 5 days. We're going to talk about ideas, theories, concepts, and in a couple of cases, actual inventions of product that really shaped the Western world and changed the way that we think about our relationship to nature and time and everything else. And of course, one of those is this really unusual topic about time, because everybody thinks, well, time is just, what happens on my watch, chronology, one thing after another. But what's really interesting is it wasn't always that way. However, since a lot of you showed up in my first lecture on photography, I thought we would at least catch up with Cadiz. So this is one of the pictures that I hope you saw in a little entry to one of the buildings. You went to this cathedral, I hope, next to the big Duomo. And sometimes you have to break the rules when it comes to photography. Remember I said, don't ever shoot directly into the sun because the dynamic range will be wrong. Well, sometimes the atmosphere allows you to do that, like last night. Last night was a really good example with enough atmospheric disturbance on the horizon that it actually could, you could see the sun as a ball. This was actually shot in Ancona in Italy a few years ago. But sometimes you can get away with that. And you're going to also want to know, how did you get the sun to be so big? And of course, the answer is, the bigger the lens, the more it distorts the relationship between the foreground and the background. So if you use a really big lens, like a 500 or 600 millimeter here, it will make the things that are far away look bigger than the things that are close up. That's how they get away with the 2,000 millimeter camera lenses when you watch television programs. Okay, let's talk about inventing time. So here's the deal. When I ask you what time it is, it all depends on your paradigm, the way that you look at the world. And it wasn't always the way that we look at it today. So there was a progress that happened in the way that we think of time. And it starts with, for us, it starts with the Greek question.
Men are haunted by the vastness of eternity. And so we ask ourselves, will our actions echo across the centuries? Will strangers hear our names long after we're gone and wonder who we were, how bravely we fought, how fiercely we loved?
Okay, so the question at the beginning, this is a clip from the opening of the movie Troy. A fabulous movie and really filled with great Greek insights, okay? But the question is, men are haunted by the vastness of, and you're waiting for them to say, in our modern world, the vastness of space. But he doesn't say that. He says, men are haunted by the vastness of eternity. Why? Because the real question about life is, what does it mean? Right? It isn't a matter of how much space you can conquer. It's a matter of whether or not your life had any meaning in the vastness of time. Because everything fades away. Everything ends up in the grave. Everything disappears. And so for the Greeks, the real question of life was, will someone remember me after I'm gone? Okay? And that sets the stage for how we think about the process of time itself. How you look at time will depend on whether you're in the ancient world, in the medieval world, or in the modern world. And of course, that means in order for it to be accurate, in order for us to have time telling, we need some mechanism by which we measure what's happening. And that, of course, depends on our concept of what change means. So we could say, how do you measure time if you don't have a clock? So in the ancient world, how did they measure time? Do you know? The sun going from the east to the west, okay? But what if so you see the sun going from the east to the west, but how do you know what time of the year it is? If you're an agrarian society, you have really interesting things like when the barley comes out of the ground, okay? And you'll recognize these ancient measurements that are based on agricultural events. And of course, when the barley comes out of the ground might be completely different one year than the next. But it doesn't matter if you're not measuring chronology, if you're only measuring in terms of the cycles that you see. Remember the Greek mythology about Persephone and Hades, right? The cycle of summer and winter. If that's what you're measuring, then your perception about how quickly you need to get to the train station changes. Because now it's just a matter of waiting for the barley to come out of the ground. In the ancient world, how else did they measure time in the ancient world? You suggested east to west, sunrise to sunset, but how did you measure the time of the day according to the movement of the sun? Do you remember that? You had sundials, right? So you watched the shadow of the dial as the sun moved, and then you could tell. And by the way, you'll see this in your biblical accounts. That idea of barley coming out of the ground comes from the Old Testament. What comes from the New Testament? The third hour of the day, which is the third hour of prayer. But it's not 3 a.m. in the morning, because midnight wasn't midnight. It was the hour of the day according to the religious rituals that were functioning, okay? So the purpose of time telling then was to give me some kind of measurement between the two of us so that I could at least have some idea what we would do together if we were separated. And we said, okay, well, let's meet at the third hour, okay? And we needed some kind of mechanism to be able to do that. But sundials, of course, depend on not just where the sun is, but they also depend on the geography, don't they? Because the sun will be in a different position if it's in Cairo or Tokyo or, let's see, when is Sabbath in Nome, Alaska? Right? Sabbath begins when the sun goes down, and it ends when the sun comes up. What happens in Nome, Alaska? You have a 6-month Sabbath. It's a little difficult since you're not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath, including, turn on the water, put on the electricity, actually eat, cook a meal. It'd be very difficult, wouldn't it? Yeah. On the other hand, 6 months of the time you could just do whatever, you wouldn't have to worry about it all. But how do they compensate for that? Because if you have a sun up or sundown to sunrise time measurement, it has to be measured according to the geography of the world as well, okay? So tell me what time it is right now. It's okay, look at your watch and tell me. Okay, it's, my watch says it's 12 minutes and 45 seconds after the hour of 10 in the morning. But of course, that's not exactly true, is it? Because as you move from east to west, the time changes every moment, right? And we're going to have to discover how we figured out how to make geography work for us when it wasn't a problem in the ancient world. Why wasn't geographical time a problem in the ancient world? Why was it possible for you and I to, basically agree that we were going to meet at the 6th hour, and no one was too concerned about the fact that I was in Tokyo and you were in New York City? Why wasn't that a problem in the ancient world? That's because travel at distances wasn't possible. How long did it take St. Paul to get from Antioch to Thessalonica? A few months, right? He wasn't worried about, oh my gosh, the jet lag, right? So the problem is time didn't become a factor in how I behaved with people in my community until travel became a problem. So until geography was a problem, time was just the convenience of you and I agreeing, okay? But geography changed things. And as a result of that, time had to be determined by some official body. And in the Middle Ages, the official body was the church. Now I'm going to read you this because it's really quite interesting. The concept of time changed in the 15th century. In the Middle Ages, time was associated with liturgical hours. Remember the 6th hour, the 5th hour, or the 6th hour of prayer? The Latin word ora, hour, was synonymous with prayer. Each of these hours was divided into 4 parts of 10 minutes. Wait a minute. I thought an hour was 60 minutes. Nope, sorry, in the 1500s, an hour was 40 minutes. 4 10-minute pieces, okay? While each minute was divided into 40 seconds, okay? In 1400, however, it became the custom to divide the hour into 60 minutes and each minute into 60 seconds. Okay, so this is really amazing, isn't it? Because if you lived in 1350, how many hours were there in the day in 1350, right? How many hours are there in the day now? It just depends on how you divide up the sequence. In other words, an hour wasn't always an hour, a minute wasn't always a minute. We've accommodated to different kinds of ways of viewing the same passage of our experience of temporal existence, but we count it differently depending on what age we were in, okay? It gets even more complicated because time, when it was agrarian, was about behavior of nature. But once we invented the mechanical clock, things got really difficult because now we had to have clocks that actually worked the same, right? Do you know anything about have you been to the dome of the big church in Florence? You know, the really spectacular church in Florence, the Duomo. You've been there, right? Have you ever thought about how the dome was made, how that ceiling stands up there? Do you know that it was it holds, I think, the record for being the highest dome constructed without internal support. In other words, in the past, they built frameworks just like we do, you know, scaffolding, and they built the dome, right? There are 2 domes in Europe that weren't built that way. One is the Pantheon, and that's because it was built by devils and you know, spiritual creatures, according to Rome anyway. They couldn't figure out how in the world they built this thing. And the second is Brunelleschi's dome, which is in Florence, right? So he was a clockmaker, and he invented a way of laying bricks in the dome. By the way, there's thousands of tons of bricks in that dome. He invented a way to lay those bricks so that they work like the springs in a mechanical clock. The tension of each layer against the other layer holds it together. You know that? It's actually 2 domes, one inside the other. In the inside, it looks around. On the outside, it isn't. You see it on the outside, right? It's octagonal on the outside. And that's because in between the 2 domes is this brickwork that works in tension with the other dome and holds the whole thing together. And in fact, it holds it so well that they could put 50 tons of marble on the top of it as the little cupola at the top, right? No, by the way, Brunelleschi kept that a secret, how he did that. And for centuries, no one could figure out how in the world he constructed that thing until they finally got some, you know, modern technique about trying to figure out how he built the tension. But he kept it a secret because he took what was a clock mechanism and built architecture from it. That's the same kind of thing that happens with the mechanical clock. Until the mechanical clock shows up, right, we have a different concept of time. And the time of the day was determined by the church bells. Why do we have church bells? To call people to worship? No. To tell you what time of the day it is. What time to get up, what time to go to work, what time to go to prayer, when you should come to Mass. All those kinds of things were handled by the church bells. So the church determined the sequence of time in any given day, right? That's the liturgical hour idea, okay? Once the mechanical clock took over, started to replace the need for a priest ringing the bells, because now you had a mechanical clock, and that started to change the way we think of hours. What happens when you go from a 40-minute hour to a 60-minute hour? How do you feel with a 40-minute hour? Rushed? Maybe you feel calmer because there's more hours in the day, right? But you speed up things when you incorporate more minutes. That was a good one, wasn't it? Okay. When you speed up the time, then you pack more minutes into the day, right? Now you have to run a little faster. Okay, so what happened? Well, time travel, distance makes a big difference. And now I have to have some way to coordinate time over distance. and along comes the British rail system. You can thank Britain for the 24-hour day. Why? Because when the British rail system started to make it easy to transport people over distance, they realized that that 12 noon in London wasn't 12 noon in Oxford. Why? Because of the distance from London to Oxford and the direction of east to west. So as you move from east to west, your relationship to the sun, and therefore the celestial time, changes, doesn't it? So you might be off by a couple of minutes. Well, if you're running a railroad, you can't have a different time in Oxford than you have in London, let alone in Edinburgh or any place else. Oh, and heaven forbid you get in an airplane, right? So they had to come up with a system that allowed them to say, we're all in the same time. We all have the same standard, even though we're separated east and west. Okay? You know that today as time zones. How many time zones are there, by the way? 24? No? Sorry. And I'm going to show you a map, and you're going to see some really funny things, because there are time zones that are 30 minutes difference, and there are time zones that are 15 minutes difference, right? That should tell you something really important. By the way, time zones are based on what? Longitude or latitude? On longitude, the up and down lines, right? This is important too, because you would think if a time zone was based on longitude, it would just follow the line from north to south, right? But have you ever noticed that time zones zigzag all over the place? Why? If they're based on literally longitude, then they should be uniform, don't you think? Why do they zigzag all over? Because time zones are not quite scientific, are they? They're more political than anything else. And I remember once I spent a summer in Nuku'alofa, Tonga in the South Pacific. And the time zone goes around those islands. Why? Because they wanted to be able to publish the first newspaper of the day. And so if they're right on the border of the difference between one day and the next, the international date line, and you can get the world to acknowledge that you just make a little jog around, then you'll become the first place in the day where the new day starts. So you could have a newspaper headline, the first news of the day, right? All political. Okay. So what happens with time zones? Well, time zones were needed because of mechanization, because of the transfer of people from one geography to the next, because of the east-west problem. Okay? But that's not the only issue. Here's your map. Look at these time zones. You'll like this one. It's 5:45 here and 6:30 there. It's 3:30 here and 4:30 there. It's 5:30 here and 6:30 there. It makes sense, 1 hour. But down here in Adelaide, you know, Adelaide and Sydney are 30 minutes difference in time. That makes travel by air chaos. I mean, how do you know when you're supposed to be at the airport when it's a 30-minute time zone difference, right? Okay, that's not the only problem. Let's try this. This is a clock. How does it work? What time is it? It's a clock in the Jewish quarter in Vienna, and it goes backwards because Hebrew reads the opposite direction, right? So here we have a clock that actually runs backwards but tells the proper time for the culture that reads it. Amazing, huh? How about this? This is the celestial clock, very famous clock, in Prague. It's not just telling you the time. Have you been there? You've seen it? Yeah. It doesn't tell you just the time, does it? It tells you all kinds of other things. Seasons, months, years, celestial movement of the constellations, etc. All mechanically done on this big building. Really, really interesting stuff. But all mechanical. So let's take a look at this then. This is a picture of, or a map of, the North Pole. So time zones are all longitude, right? At the North Pole, all the time longitude lines come together, right? So what time is it at the North Pole? Oh, wait a minute. This is the exact North Pole. That means it's 11 o'clock in New York. It's 9 o'clock where we are. It's 8 o'clock in Rome. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Tokyo. You see what's happening? All I have to do is just move around in a circle and I can be in all 24 zones in the space of a few inches, right? So what time is it when all the longitudes come together? Time to get a watch, but how do you set it? Okay? I mean, I have a watch that actually changes. It's a really interesting watch that picks up a radio signal and changes according to the geography where I am, okay? Automatically, okay? It would have a hard time at the North Pole because of which zone am I in, okay? So what time is it at the North Pole? This is, I heard it. GMT, why? It's because they decided it would be GMT. It has nothing to do with longitude at all. It has to do with the decision to treat the North Pole as though it's always on Greenwich Mean Time, right? So if you want to go to the North Pole, you can leave London, travel for hours, get to the North Pole, and you'll still be on London time. Isn't that nice? Yeah. Heaven forbid you try to come from Tokyo. You're going to really be messed up. Okay. So wait a minute. Where can you go, where can you live, where you can have breakfast at 8 o'clock, lunch at noon, dinner at 9 p.m., midnight, and a midnight snack, and be back in your bed in 60 minutes? Okay? Where? There is a place on Earth where you can do this. Where is it? Let me give you a clue. Antarctica. If GMT is the time at the North Pole, what time is it in Antarctica? No. In Antarctica, it's whatever the time is of the camp for the country that you happen to be in. Okay? So, if you are in the right camp, you can wake up and have breakfast at 8, get in your plane, fly to the next camp and have lunch at noon in that camp, get in the plane, fly to the next camp, have dinner at 9 in that camp, fly back to your original camp and go to have your midnight snack and go to bed and all do the whole thing in 60 minutes. Because the time depends on whether you're with the Danes or with the group from Tokyo or with the US or with the Germans or whatever. I mean, it's all over the place, right? So, interesting. Because there are the time zones in Antarctica. Isn't that interesting? What a great place. You can just decide whatever time you want and just go there, okay? All right, so what does that mean? It means that when we think about time, we're really thinking about temporal experience, geographical location, and political environment. Time becomes a function of geography, politics, and my experience, my living experience of the transition from one change to another. Why do we have a new year? Now we get to the really interesting stuff. I mean, the other stuff is really great for a trivia. And by the way, just in case we have a trivia question, you know time zones, right? If you're in New York, we're going to land in Miami, we're going to end up in Miami. If we end up in Miami at noon, what time is it in Los Angeles? Well, how many time zones are there in the United States? 4, right? Eastern, Central, Mountain, Pacific, okay? So you have to count for the 4-hour time changes from Miami to Los Angeles, okay? Let's fly to Beijing. How many time zones are there in China? 1. Imagine that. It's the same distance east to west, but it's all in the same time zone. 1 time zone for the entire country, okay? So what does that tell you? Time zones are completely artificial. They're whatever the government decides they should be, right? So now let's talk about this. How come we have a new year? Because we are still operating with what Mircea Eliade calls the myth of eternal return. We're still operating as though things cycle. So in the ancient world, the annual cycle, it doesn't have to be annual, the Mayan calendar cycle is 27,000 years, okay? But we just happen in the West to be part of a ancient pagan culture that believed that we just kept going around the circle. So if you think of the ideas of time in the ancient world, because they're agrarian, they're based on a cycle. And every year you go around and you start over again, which means that you don't get a lot done in your life. You just go around the circle 50 or 60 times, right? And in fact, in the ancient world, this is a really important concept, because when you think about what happens in the ancient world, as we've discussed as going along this journey, the concept of progress in the ancient world is inhibited by their view of time, which was circles. Right? In the ancient world, you just went around and did it all over again. So when we have New Year in our modern world, we're celebrating a very ancient pagan ritual that basically says you get to make a bunch of resolutions which won't get done, and next year you can make them again. Right? You just go around the circle one more time. Okay? But that wasn't the only view. That's just one view of time. Here's another one. Oh, sorry, that was Greek time. No, this is the other one, Greek time. So Greek time is based on the idea of a flow in a river, right? It's not circular. The river just doesn't go around and around. If I'm standing on the riverbank and I watch things flowing by me, I think to myself, oh, downstream are things I've already seen. Where I stand on the shore is what I'm seeing at this moment. What is upstream are things that I haven't yet seen, but they're coming my way, right? So the Greek idea of time is a line. And in fact, we have an expression, timeline. Where do you think that came from? It came from the Greek idea that everything that's going to ever happen and ever has happened is laid out on a line. And if we could draw the line of the entire existence of creation, right? We would have all of the events laid out on this line, and we just happen to stand in one place on the line. So we only see those things that have already gone by us, and we're waiting for all the things to come to us, right? What does that imply? That the future's already fixed. And in fact, I can think of some ritual prayers that happen annually, which basically say something like this: God, please allow those things which you've already ordained for us to be aware of them when they show up. In other words, it's already in the river, it's just flowing toward me, and if I just wait, I'll see all those preordained things come into my life. But they were already always there, just a matter of my perspective on the riverbank. It also makes possible the idea of time travel. You know, time travel is basically illogical. You realize that, right? Because if I really could travel in time, I could go back and kill my great-great-grandfather. And what would that mean? Okay? So think about that. You love the movie. The guy sits in the chair, he pushes the lever, and he goes into a new world, and all the stuff changes around him, and time travel. But time travel is based on this Greek idea that everything's already laid out on the line, and all I'm doing is moving my perspective up and down the riverbank. Okay? We have, in the Western world, very much been influenced by the Greek concept of time. There's a couple of problems with that, one of which is time travel. But if we map time in the ancient world, it looks like this. If we map time in the Greek world, it looks like this. But those aren't the only ways. Then there's Disney's contribution. Now listen. Circle of life.
We are all connected in the great circle of life.
There we go. So Disney now just took an ancient idea that everything just keeps going around and around and made it into a movie, right? I mean, they're very good at that, right? So, okay, how about this one? In Greek thought, since time is just the position that I have on the riverbank, then time is really just space, isn't it? All of my concepts are before, after, during, all those ideas that are spatial turn out to be the way that I think of the Greek timeline, which is why I can think of time travel, because I'm just moving my space along the riverbank, okay? But of course, that has lots of problems, because time isn't space. It's something else. And because it's something else, other implications happen, like this.
Doesn't happen till October.
Well, it's always October and November and March. So many futures, and they're all real. Just don't know which one will coalesce. Until then, they're all happening. Like this one, it's my favorite moment in human history. All the things that had to converge for the Mets to win the World Series, they were in last place every single season until they won it all.
You said you had a gift for us.
That baseball, for instance, thrown for the last out of Game 5, manufactured in 1962 by the Spalding factory of Chicopee, Massachusetts, was aerodynamically flawed due to the horsehide being improperly tanned because Sheila, the tanner's wife, left him for a Puerto Rican golf pro that Sunday.
The gift?
See,
Yeah.
oh, yes, of course.
Okay? So, we get the idea of connected, right? The golf pro who absconds with the tanner's wife, right? But what's interesting about this Men in Black version is that he basically gives us a Greek view. The Greek view is that everything has already happened. It's just a matter of which one of all the things that have happened is going to become our reality, right? They're all there. Just a matter of which choice of reality we're going to have, okay? So, what would happen if there are many futures? Well, if every choice that we made, which is his suggestion, if every choice that we made influenced which future would come about, then what choices would you make? Let's see. Do you know that you have permanently affected the history of the world by choosing to wear those sneakers instead of the brown ones today? Right? Yes. Well, now you do. It's too late. You can ask forgiveness, though. Okay? I mean, think about it. If every choice you make actually influences which future will coalesce, then you're paralyzed because everything that will ever happen rests on your shoulders. Right? You sure? You sure you want to wear that vest? Because I can tell you right now that that's going to cause cholera in 2025 for a group of people in India. If you'd worn the other vest, it would have been fine, but too late now. Right? I mean, you can see what's going to happen if I have a Greek view of time and everything is already there and the only choices that I have are choices that are preordained or that will make a difference in which future is going to coalesce. Now I'm in real trouble because I won't know which future I have to choose, and the consequences are irredeemable.
It's for success.
Kay! Griffin, right? Okay, we're here
Because of Boris the animal.
correct. We believe he may be
Coming
coming.
to kill me, yes, he'll be here in 2 minutes, unless, of course, we're in the possible future where he made all the lights on Bowery and got here early and is just about to discharge a weapon from the doorway, in which case we're all dead in 2 seconds. Ah, good, that was a close one.
All right, Kay, I need a space gun.
The Bogdadites consume any planet in their path. Mine, Romans, the Parlaxians. I tried to stop them, but if we can stop them here, if we can deny them Earth, we can stop them forever. They'll starve before they reach the next planet. 63 seconds.
Oh, how do we do that? Stop him.
What? Oh, sorry. I have something for you. A gift. It can protect you. I had to hide it from Boris, but if you find me again, I'll give it to you. Thank you. What a game! Amazing! It's a real miracle.
Whoa, what do you mean? What miracle?
It's what, 30 seconds? I have to go.
Wait, no, we got you.
Negative possibilities are multiplying as we speak. 20 seconds.
All right, we got it.
No,
Relax.
I'll take the
If
front.
your watch is broken and I have gastric distress.
Find your place in the world.
Oh dear. This is the one where Boris is coming through that door in 12, 11, 10. Wait, did you have chocolate milk this morning?
Yes.
Cindy.
Oh, chocolate milk. So you see, the interesting part about some Hollywood movies is they're really fascinating studies about time, right? And all that kind of interesting stuff that happens. And you just watched the movie and thought, oh, that was cute. But what they're really doing is forcing you to rethink your concept of time. All right, like this.
Frustrating, isn't it? My name is Thompson.
Whatever happened to free will?
We actually tried free will before. After taking you from hunting and gathering to the height of the Roman Empire, we stepped back to see how you do on your own. You gave us the Dark Ages for 5 centuries. Until finally we decided we should come back in. The chairman thought that maybe we just needed to do a better job with teaching you how to ride a bike before taking the training wheels off again. So we gave you the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, scientific revolution. For 600 years, we taught you to control your impulses with reason. Then in 1910, we stepped back again. Within 50 years, you'd brought us World War I, the Depression, fascism, the Holocaust, and capped it off by bringing the entire planet to the brink of destruction in the Cuban Missile Crisis. At that point, a decision was taken to step back in again before you did something that even we couldn't fix. You don't have free will, David. You have the appearance of free will.
There you go, right? It looks like you make choices, but in fact, it's already all been determined. So, prophecy as history in advance, and this is the Greek idea, that if you really just knew prophecy, which is only telling you what's already going to happen, then you would know in advance how to behave now because you'd already know what was going to happen in the future. And that's the normal idea of prophecy. By the way, an idea that didn't exist until the 3rd century. Prophecy in, for example, the Old Testament is never about predicting the future. In fact, Neusner, a really great Jewish scholar, once said that the whole purpose of prophecy is to not come true. So think about that.
She used to stare at this picture for hours.
All right. Prophecy, history in advance. What an ancient culture, however, had a completely different view of what we've been talking about. So we've been talking about 2 things, a circle idea of time and a straight line. The circle idea takes away all of your purpose. The straight line makes you accountable for everything or just a puppet on the string, okay? But there's one culture that had a different view, and it's this. What's happening? There's a circle going around touching a line. In other words, think of it as a white dot on the edge of a bicycle tire. It has circular motion, right? You still have the seasons, you still have the 24 hours, you still have things going around and around, but every time the bicycle tire touches the ground, it's in a different place. It looks the same, déjà vu, but it's not quite the same because things change along the way. This idea is the cycloidal version of time. It's like a slinky that you used to let go down the stairs, right? It's all those nice little circles all wound together so that each time it goes down, it changes just a little bit. That, by the way, is the Hebraic view of time, and that's why the Hebrews invented history, which we'll talk about tomorrow. Okay? So, in that view, there's a notion of a Hebrew word, aharit, and it means the future. It also means the past, which is quite interesting, because the idea in the cycloidal view of time is that you're like a man in a rowboat. How many of you ever rowed a boat? Do you row the boat by looking where you're going or where you've been? Okay, you already know. If you try to row the boat by looking where you're going, you can't keep it in a straight line because you have to constantly look over your shoulder. How do you row a boat in a straight line? You line up with things in the past that you can see, and you trust that you will be in a straight line as long as you keep those markers in the past in line, right? You're not looking at the future, you're looking at the past. So in the Hebraic concept, the future is behind your head because you can't see it. In the Greek concept, the future is in front of you so that you have a day planner, right? But in the ancient world of Hebrew, because the future's behind you, you don't have eyes in the back of your head, you have to trust what happened in the past, which means you have perfect hindsight, but no foresight. Okay? Exactly the opposite of our modern Western Greek idea. So,
Is this some sort of test?
In a way, it's all a test. For everybody. Even the members of the Adjustment Bureau. David, you risked everything for Elise. And Elise, when you came through that door at the Statue of Liberty, you risked everything too. But you inspired me. Seems like you inspired the chairman too.
Is that about us?
Yes.
What does it say?
It says that this situation between the two of you is a serious deviation from the plan. So the chairman rewrote it.
So here's the concept. Choice alters the future, right? In a world that's not a line and not a circle, choice alters the future. And what if there was another way to actually think about that? And there is a movie that talked about nonlinear time. Or this, oh, by the way, it's based on this. You know what these are? Palindromes, you know what they are? They're words that read the same way forward and backward. Okay? We have words like that. And here's an example of a few of them, right? But what would happen if your entire thinking, your whole language system worked forward and backward? What if you could think backward in the same way that you think forward? What would happen? There'd be nonlinear thinking.
I know what it is.
What?
It's not a weapon. It's a gift. The weapon is their language. They gave it all to us. Do you understand what that means?
So we can learn heptapod, if we survive.
If you learn it, when you really learn it, you begin to perceive time the way that they do. So you can see what's to come. The time, it isn't the same for them. It's non-linear.
It's non-linear, which means it doesn't follow the line of the Greeks. It does something else. Okay, so that raises some really interesting questions about how we read. Why do we read right to left, or left to right, or up and down? Or why don't we read in one direction on one line and in the other direction on the next line? It would be so much more efficient, wouldn't it? You wouldn't have to keep going back with the typewriter carriage. You could just keep typing and the lines would go like this. Why do we do that? Because we have concepts of mechanics and temporal space that are dictating how we behave in the world. And that's one of the interesting things when you start to understand what's happening with the idea of time and how it's changed over the history of humanity, that allows you to start rethinking all of the ordinary things that you just took for granted. Okay? So, what time is it? Time to stop. Thank you. If you come back tomorrow or the next day, whenever the Currents have me next, we'll be talking about how all of this influenced our idea of history and what happens when we start changing that idea too. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for coming.